Welcome to Inaudible. My name is Jeremy Weiland, and I'm joined by my co host, Jamie Leisman. On this podcast, we discuss the weird, beautiful channeled messages found in the archives of organizations in contact with the Confederation of Planets in service to the one infinite creator. These archives contain transcripts of messages from allegedly discarnate sources who articulate a philosophy of spiritual evolution. Jamie and I will try to provide analysis and commentary on the philosophy described in these messages, identifying the common themes and grappling with the application of this information to our human lives. However, we are not gurus or experts of any kind, so please evaluate our remarks in light of our shortcomings and use your own best judgment. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and welcome, Jamie. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
Great. I'm doing all right too. This has been a challenging year so far, but hey, I'm still in it.
Yep, yep.
um, the challenge of this new year and how it's kind of just come at you full force is why I think I finally chose a topic that I'd been meaning to discuss for some time across different hosts or co-hosts, and it has to do with despair. Um, it is something that I think needs to be looked at from the Confederation point of view, uh, fruitfully for a seeker, because it is such a normal part of the seeking path. So, in the same way that you need to talk about and get comfortable with meditation, you need to talk about and get comfortable with working on your distortions and facing your shadow self, and learning to integrate these things. Uh, the experience of despair is one that we seem to be destined for. Uh, you know, and it seems a lot of it has to do with the veil between um, the conscious and unconscious mind. Uh, Anything you'd like to talk about at the exposition here?
Um, well, that's a pretty good intro, Jeremy. Yeah, despair, very prevalent, especially with the third density experience and us being kind of constantly disconnected from seeing things as a whole and seeing things as the truth of unity. And yeah, I'm ready to dive into this.
Well, I just think that I think the world's at a very precarious spot right now, and it is really, really, really difficult. No matter what you think about anything, political or social or whatever, it's hard to see us getting out of this without taking some licks, and
For
other
sure.
people taking licks too. And it is a moment where I feel like a lot of people are despairing. 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a resident of the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and there is a lot of flashpoint active pain and suffering, anger in my community right now, and it's very potent.
And I would just, remind people, one thing that we can do about this that doesn't really require much of us is to just visualize healing for the planet and to incorporate that, if you can, into a daily practice that hopefully you already have or you have an intention to establish, because it is so helpful to be reminded of the that this situation is one that we are not just fretting about in our minds and like trying to figure out how we solve the problem, as if that's even reasonable. Um, and there's a place for that. There's a place for the things that you need to do in the worldly details to be a responsible human being. But there's also a place for attending to your emotional needs. And if you have the metaphysics that uh, allows this to tend to the planet as a whole, um, this is one of the themes of the Richmond's work the past year, was this sense in which how we relate to the planet seems to be a huge kind of area of study that is involved with our ability to align more with the planet and to ease the transition to fourth density. I don't want to go into too much detail on that, but I make a point of sending love and light to the planet every day as part of my morning offering. And I would just encourage people to not overthink it, but to just the intention and the spiritual level is what works. And I believe that when you're addressing the planet as a whole, you are addressing an aspect of ourselves, each and every one of us, that is not as limited as our conscious ego minds are, and has the ability to use whatever attention we can give it to do something and to help alleviate the many distortions that we have as a people, as a planet. All right, rant over.
Yeah, I would just add to that a little bit that we're so used to as humans in our lives of action and taking real action, physical movements, saying things, and it may seem a bit like antithetical or not as helpful to just sit in silence and send love and light to the planet and our city. But let me tell you, like it is effective, and I try and put my faith in the fact that the energy will go where it needs to go. And it's not just super easy for me either. I do sometimes have doubts about the efficacy of meditation and meditations on peace and all these things, but
Yeah.
I doesn't let me doesn't hold me back.
No, I think that's an important point. When we're talking about efficacy in the spiritual, more time space adjacent realm, we are talking about a completely different yardstick altogether. And we have the point is not to measure its efficacy. The point is it is another thing that we can do while we are tending to our own emotional needs, our ability to sit with ourselves, to forgive ourselves, to balance ourselves, to take this time for ourselves, to also realize that we have a greater self that is involved. And part of shepherding fourth density into this planet in a way that will cause a minimal amount of disruption, I believe, will be people taking this individual caring responsibility of doing the shepherding, and to let, instead of, let me put it this way, instead of coming up with a like program to address this in society, to instead sit with the intention on the spiritual level and let it just come out in your life naturally. Then there's no artifice to it. You are not executing on a strategy that may or may not work. This really is a big part of what I think it means for us to have a mind and a body and a spirit in a complex and reinforcing way. Is that we don't have to be fully aware of any particular piece of this complex at any one time for it to work. And it shows the depth and the diversity of consciousness that we are already partaking in. We're just not aware of it, you know?
For sure.
The other thing I'd say is it is not this inner work and this more metaphysical work is no reason to not work in the physical world too, and to engage in what activities you want to engage in. You can have both. In fact, I think that's one of the things that in my activism, I think was lacking, not just in me, but in a lot of people, was like not taking time. They call it self-care, but that just sounds like, watching Netflix for an evening. No, it's about this intensive activism within yourself to bring yourself into alignment and bring out the best self you can be so that you're there to help people. You don't necessarily know. You can't figure this out intellectually what's going to happen. So you have to prepare yourself ahead of time and balance yourself ahead of time so that best self will be ready at a moment you cannot anticipate. And that's what I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well put.
Um, I one thing before we jump into, we have a Laleema transcript today that's going to kind of center things. We might branch out into some other places, but one of the books that made the biggest impression on me, Jamie, I know you didn't have time to read this, and it's a really tough read, honestly, if you're not trained. But when I was working closely with Steve about 10 years ago at my first channeling intensive, he really reinforced in me the how helpful it would be to read Kierkegaard's Sickness unto Death, which is basically a sort of quasi philosophical treatise on the subject of despair and how it factors in to one's awareness and one's, I guess, spiritual seeking. It's extremely Christian.
Yeah,
So there's no way to address it directly and not simply appropriate its concepts unless you want to get into that Christianity. I think a lot of its ideas are extremely transmissible to the law of one and to other spiritual philosophies, precisely because um, it, first of all, deals directly with the conundrum of having three factors to ourselves: mind, body, and spirit, and that the self is no one of those things. So he's very, very concerned with what is this self that feels despair, what uh, what creates it, and he basically is. I have not given this enough study, and that's why I'm not going to talk about it at length. But he says that the self is kind of like a relation between these things and a relation to itself, right? It's this reflectiveness in a way. And I know I am probably misappropriating this in some way. I'm just thinking of Steve watching this and like pulling his hair out. Uh, so what I would say is I think this is really fruitful, especially because he seems to be gesturing at the operation of a complex in the same way that
for
there's a
sure.
Ra, right? And there's some really interesting things to say about the different kinds of despair that he identifies. So, like, he says, despair at not being a self, right? You don't really know your true self, so you don't know how wretched you are before God. He says, like, he equates despair with sin, and I think that's another big thing that would be hard. You have to get it out of that because, of course, in the law of
Yeah.
one, we don't have this concept of sin, but he's gesturing at something or he's pointing at something that's extremely specific in the theology. So it's hard for me without more study to extricate it. And so I just want to confess to appropriating and misappropriating this stuff and encourage people to check it out. I think it's got a lot of interesting ideas that we can apply to how we relate to those moments in our lives where the only thing that can get us through is faith. Because we know that faith is that galvanizing force for polarizing positive.
Yeah, I wasn't able to read much of that.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, he talk in the talking about the self and basically describing it as here's the Venn diagram of the self.
Yeah.
Where there's like overlapping and none are mutually like exclusive of the other and
And what he
go on.
didn't have was a concept of an unconscious because Freud hadn't come on the
Right.
scene yet.
Okay,
At
that's
least I
some
don't think
interesting
so. I think he's more early 1800s.
1840
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
late
So right
1840s.
before Freud, honestly. But and of course he probably wouldn't have paid attention to it because he seemed to have kind of like a aversion to an overly scientific approach to these things. My understanding is that he wanted to distance himself from Hegel, who was the heavyweight in his time, and instead of systematize things, he wanted to make it more about the personal experience. So going more in this phenomenological direction, or this direction in which we really study like what it means to have these awarenesses, to have these experiences. Like how do we take their qualitative measure? Okay, that is as much as I'm going to try to educate. I'm hoping maybe I can talk to Steve about this on the podcast sometime, and he would be able to do a much better job to help guide the listener on this way. And with that said, why don't we jump into the Laleema transcript, because once again, we will have a treatment of despair at these three different levels of awareness. Okay, so this is September 22nd, 1985, and we've done one Laleema before. They're a fifth density contact that only shows up in the mid 80s, really. I don't think they have many 90s appearances and none after that, when it's all QO most of the time. But anyway, they weren't like one of the original ones like Hatan or Oxal. So here we go. Uh, we have been asked to speak this evening upon the subject of despair, its form, its function, and its use. We would divide our speaking into three categories: the despair of the mind, the despair of the body, and the despair of the spirit. The despair of the mind is an empty thing, full of no virtue except that of self-destruction. Within the mind, there are limitations which have been given to the self by the self. Some of these limitations are those called limitations of intelligence. And one of the burdens of increased intelligence is an increased capacity for despair. I think this is something that is pretty generally understood. I was watching like a YouTube short or something with some person who's been struggling for a long time through a long life. I'm not sure he was housed at the moment, and he was saying, if he could go back and tell his young self something, it would be, if you just go and get a job and you get a wife and kids and a house and you pay a mortgage and you go to a steady job, you don't have time to think. And it's thinking is where all of the troubles come from. And it's that I
Yeah,
resonate with that.
I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, our responsibilities, they can be daunting, but boy, they do keep us busy.
It really, and I think it really has to do because and Kierkegaard said this too, but I'm pretty sure that QO or some Confederation contact addressing this subject uh, said or essentially said that you can't really have despair in second density because you don't have the ability to reflect on your condition and know whether it's right or wrong. Like animals, yes, they suffer or they feel pain, but I believe it was Hatan who said they don't really suffer in the same way that we do because they just accept their condition. Like if it's painful, it's painful. And that's just the way it is. They don't have the ability to say, "I shouldn't be feeling this way," at least until you get into the higher tiers of animals. I think. Then I think with dogs, I don't know. Maybe they have me figured out. They have my number, but I think they know that they shouldn't be hungry. I have a beagle,
They
so
they have evolved in such a way to be able to, communicate a little more clearly their conditions, I believe.
yeah. Anyway, one thing I would say about these limitations. So I don't think they mean to say that there are only limitations of intelligence. I think that's just one example of, to me, the mind as a medium of consciousness is primarily one in which it is about creating distinctions, divisions, limitations, concreteness, like trying to, like if like to take the vast potential of intelligent infinity, right? All the unmanifest potential of the creator, and select this and select this and select this. It is a limiting factor. It's a filtering factor. And then we can think about those limits and filters in very abstract terms when we have that ability to abstractly reason that self-awareness gives us. Uh, Potentially something that is part of what the spirit complex gives us, that sort of second feedback loop. If you think of the mind and body complex as mind sort of addressing the sensations of body and body feeding sensations to the mind, and the mind sort of like over time, learning those behaviors. Then spirit gives that entire complex another feedback loop at which it can reflect on itself. And there seems to be something inherent in self awareness that's about our ability to kind of step outside ourselves in the moment and sort of think laterally about our desires, our will, these kinds of things. Sorry to get so abstract. Um, but I think the funny thing is I think Kierkegaard says something very, very similar. And so I would just leave that little Easter egg there. Anyway, so these limitations are a huge part of what makes mind mind and what creates the possibility for despair, especially the limitation of the veil. Anything to add, JB? I know I monologue there.
No, I'd have you keep going.
All right.
That's pretty clear to me.
So one of the burdens of increased intelligence is an increased capacity for despair. And what, my friends, is that of which the mind despairs? The mind despairs of its very limitations. In truth, there are no limitations. There are only challenges, lessons, and glory. Yes, my friends, we say glory. For the stronger the despair, the more glorious the battle which may be waged to outlast the feelings of helplessness, doom, and foreboding, uselessness, boredom, and disinterest that altogether add up to the definition of despair. The despair of the mind is that which is not, standing in the face of that which is. Therefore, the state of mental despair is folly and almost always unproductive. However, the dynamic of despair, that is, midnight as opposed to noon, is available to everyone, every spirit that lives in mind and body, in your illusion at some time within the incarnation. Therefore, although it is useless, it is a common experience. In the grand scheme, the very uselessness of despair is that which limits man's ability to feel it. It is rather a dynamic against which one plays out one's incarnation, I see. The other dynamic being pure joy. It is between these two poles that one may analyze one's true position with regard to the learning of the one great original thought of love. There's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Well, let me try to speak about it this way. To the extent that the mind is this faculty for limitation and filtering and constructs that hem in the unbridled infinity of potential in the Creator, then one of the problems we have is that, like, we don't have the ability for our lives to have the platonic idealism of those thoughts that we have, those expectations that we have. They are perfect, and they don't have the nuances and the grittiness of third density physical life. And so we always are kind of frustrated that we can't realize what we imagine perfectly. I mean, sometimes we can, but often our disappointments come from this ideal that we've created in our head. For example, to live in a functioning, state, and the reality, which is that we don't, and in my opinion, and it's obvious how we got here. Like, I don't know how else to say it. So I just don't want to belabor that because that's easy. That's easy radio. I want to talk about something deeper. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so the ability to sort of understand yourself, not simply as a mind in a uncomfortable state of mind, but as a overall mind body spirit complex. And this is one tiny experience that you're having. And as you sit with your complex and listen to it rather than just talking and drowning it out in conscious awareness, when you meditate and you sit and you feel into this wider selfhood, then it's easier, I think, and it becomes able. You become able to use these experiences more, and that's really like why I called this. The title of this podcast, Despair and Its Uses, because it's well and good to say it's okay to feel despair. It's not a sign of failure. It's not a sign of anything that is necessarily unexpected in life. In the same way that like when you get pregnant, like your body starts rejecting it and you throw up. That is not a sign that anything's wrong, but like it feels like it, right? It looks like it. Like if you didn't know better, you would think that you were sick. And so I think that despair is the same way, where like it's a necessary aspect of the seeking path, just like the dark night of the soul. Um, but that is no comfort. And I guess that's
Yeah, no.
really where we need to land, is that
Yeah.
I'm not here to comfort you except to say that I share it. And hopefully that's some small comfort. I think that's what social memory is largely about, is we all share in this common alienation. And by being by opening ourselves up to each other, we transcend it. But we can only do that by being a different kind of self than you and me talking right here, you know?
Yeah. I, you know, just like anybody else, easily my mind gets into these little traps. And it's interesting that they start things out that that the limitations have been given to the self by the self. Like that is huge. Like when I think about a lot of my just my personal frustrations and my concerns, like most of those are, like one of my favorite quotes is like expectations are the root of all disappointment. Like, and that is just something that I always think about, but or just rings as such a truth to me. And there's like I get like I have been, in my personal life been working on, some of like trying to really understand some of my the things that make me angry or the things that I'm afraid of, and trying to work with those. It's not a comfortable thing to do, but it can bear so much fruit. And and I start to try and think of things as like, instead of like I am angry or I am depressed or I am sad, I try and like, well, I'm experiencing depression. I'm trying to like, instead of like identifying myself as the thing, trying to like consider it as an experience and kind of step out of it a little bit. And that's been a little bit helpful. But things are, especially with current events right now, like there are some things that are some pretty powerful things are happening right now. And it's hard to, it's hard to know what to do.
It's created a situation, has it not, in which we're not going to think our way out of this, I think.
Right.
Like it's pretty
Yeah.
obvious we don't have the capacity to do that for one reason or another. Like you diagnose it all you want, but
Yeah.
like this is the situation. So to me, it kind of almost, I don't mean to sound like I'm a, like I'm looking for like the, what do you call it? The rapture or something like that. I want to be like that because I don't know when it should be. That's not my purview. My purview is to help as much as I can here and to try and balance myself as much as I can while I'm here. But it does seem like it's creating a condition on this planet in which nobody who relies on their identity as a human being on this planet is going to be able to trust in the society in which they have that membership, or the government in which they have that membership. Like it's all going to come down to who are you really, not all of these superficial things that more and more are just going to be degraded along with the societies that mold those individuals, right? Like it is not the thing where like there's going to be this huge outpouring, I think, of virtue on people's part, except to the extent that people let go of what has been. That's really sad and really scary. Um,
Yeah.
and the wonderful thing is that you're not in charge of how that plays out. Like it's not up to you. The only thing that you can do if you want to be helpful is prepare yourself. And I'm not talking about like stocking, you know, survival goods or anything like that. I'm just talking about make sure you're the best self you can be for when that happens.
Yeah.
Because these things are going to really hurt us. It's just obvious it is. We're hurting. And the more that we can have a relation to that is one of care and healing and not one of, just like smacking ourselves and stealing ourselves and deadening ourselves,
Yeah, I mean, because there's so much like retribution or
Yeah.
like blame and like people just still want to blame and like, oh, but the campaign promises and oh, but they said this and that, like all the I told you so's at some point are going to need to stop, and there needs to be an amnesty in general for human beings.
No, I don't have
You
any
know,
problem
like,
with I told you so's, especially, I mean, I wish we had an opposition party, right?
right.
And so like the I told you so's are neither here nor there. It's like, do you want to help or not? I think it's, my feeling is, those elections only happen once every 4 years. That leaves a lot of time to do stuff that has a lot more impact. So whatever that is that you want to do. All right. Should we get back to this?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's move on to the body.
All right. Therefore, that which is useless is rather a constant. They're talking about this, the despair of mind. That which is useless is rather a constant, an undertone within the life experience, always available, in which the mind knows nothing. Mental joy is the opposing dynamic in which the mind knows all. These are the limits within your illusion of that which we call love. That's interesting.
It is.
The despair of the body is a reflection of the despair of the mind. When an entity is in possession of mental despair and has not moved from that dynamic into a productive mode of thinking, analyzing, feeling, and acting, that despair becomes incorporated within the body complex. Thence comes disease and ultimately death. Therefore, the wages of continued despair are the death of the body, and therefore the death of the intelligence which informs the body. There you have form and function. Form is always following function. So Ra, I'll put the exact quote in the notes, but Ra says the body is the reflection of the mind. And that's something I know we've thought a lot about in the working group and different circles we're part of. It seems like despair is exactly following that rubric. And I think they're just giving a specific example of the kind of influence the mind has. When it's this influence in which one cannot be what one wants to be because of some limitation, whether imposed or natural, like the body eventually reflects that.
Yeah, I mean that seems pretty straightforward to me.
Yeah.
I
I'm just
mean,
saying, like,
like that is that the sickness before death we're talking about here?
it's very in line with it. No,
You
that was
know,
from
like
Laleema. So what does he say about the spirit body? I don't know if I can speak to Kierkegaard's ideas on that.
yeah.
Simply the fact that the body has this ability to sort of trap the individual, and its sensations are something you're subject to by no choice of your own. You know, but I'm way off the reservation, I'm sure.
Yeah, I the body does. I think it's. I mean, we think of ourselves as a whole. I mean, we should, but sometimes it just seems like the body does its own thing and is automatic in so many things, and like what we say or think doesn't have a lot of effect on the body, but it sure does.
Yeah. And it's this ability for us not simply to be like able to communicate with our body on the body's terms and to understand and appreciate it and work with it, but this cooperative mentality that comes from the fact that one is beginning more and more to identify with spirit and therefore with the entirety of the complex, in which one doesn't have to will any specific thing being done. One can lean on the complexes largely to coordinate things in a way where you kind of set the spiritual agenda. I'm being very, very vague here, and I probably don't make a lot of sense, But like what I'm talking about is this idea that in third density, we usually emphasize our minds. We emphasize our ability to think, to communicate, all things that require this faculty here. And so it makes sense that the limitations on that mind force us into the spiritual direction, forced us force us to deal with the paradoxes of consciousness, um, and the paradox of individuation within unity. Like it's in the spirit, I believe, that all of these unreconcilable tensions, seemingly to us, become resolved. And they become resolved in the same, like in this very, as Kierkegaard would say, dialectical way, in which the solution can't really be found within the opposing pieces within the system. You have to kind of step outside the complex and see it as a whole, and only then does it make sense. Um, so I think that at least fairly represents his difference with Hegel about dialectics. Anyway, um, let's move on before I embarrass myself further. Spiritual despair, on the other hand. So they've been saying, despair of the body is like this choice it's made. It's some sort of like catalyst or self-imposed like limitation that one doesn't accept before they accept it, and so they feel the pain of that lack of acceptance of self. The body, a reflection of that. Spiritual despair, they're going to describe completely differently. Spiritual despair, they say, on the other hand, is an absolute necessity. It is, rather than being a zero, a moving dynamic within that which informs the growth and evolution of spirit. It is only metaphysical despair, that is, the recognition that one knows nothing, that one has lost control of everything, and that one is faced with complete darkness of soul, which forces that great sliver or portion of the one creator, which is your consciousness, to turn, transform, and begin the new. Not having left behind that which is old in the soul, but adding unto it, accreting more wisdom, more compassion, and more of a feeling of unity, which one can receive only when one has become desperate enough to release oneself from the expectation of any knowledge whatsoever. So Kuo or Laleema seems to have a very Socratic idea here. Like it's the real enlightenment comes from recognizing that we know nothing. I think with one possible addition, which is it's not simply turning away from dependency on the mind, but it's turning to dependency on spirit, of learning to work with your direct conduit to intelligent infinity and the creator. And like just everything, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'm at a loss for words, but
Right.
and to let this stuff work itself out through your connection with that. And I think that's precisely why, I've said in the past, I think, I just don't see any way to polarize service to others and really effectively serve others until you have some modicum of intuition developed. Because it just doesn't seem like you would be able to do that unless you were like kind of letting yourself feel it out in this very subtle way that you would never be able to explain. Right? Like, how can you possibly know, like, and like, yes, there's a place for making mistakes and healing that or like, learning from it. But like, it seems to me like the Confederation does talk about successful service, and it comes from recognizing the need. And because the need is not always verbally articulated or articulated in any way that we can recognize and act upon, like it's always a crapshoot unless like we have some ESP, you know?
Right. You just have to be a really, really, really good listener.
I guess so.
And then that's one of like the foundational, foundational skills of someone on the right hand path. Like just because we're just not used to overtly even understanding exactly what we need. Most people don't even understand exactly how they feel. We're just kind of bumbling around in the dark a little bit. But if you can meet someone where they're at, I loved that Hark session about empathy,
Yeah,
and that is such a good one because it is definitely a skill that needs to be cultivated.
absolutely. And it's kind of a way in which we have any hope whatsoever of addressing despair in another. And like, I don't think it's going off the reservation too much to say that it comes from being able to face despair within ourselves. Not necessarily even to accept it, because that is a huge leap to just accept that you know, the consciousness that you most easily occupy and like that is yourself is absolutely doomed. Absolutely doomed. I mean, just from the mortality of life, in a way that you have other intuitions that that that's not actually the case. So you're like in this tension, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you knew that you were an eternal spirit, then like, if there was no veil, then you would just deal with it. So, all right, did we want to return? Is there any more to read? All right, so spiritual despair comes from this uh, darkness that we are unable to see ourselves clearly. I think this has some. Again, Kierkegaard will give you some ideas of the different ways in which, as being a spiritual self, we might experience different kinds of despair. But we'll just call it despair, and say that it has to do with this recognition of our limitations, I think. And it so empties us out. It so breaks us down that a as Laleema says, it forces that great sliver or portion of the one creator, which is your consciousness, to turn, transform, and begin the new. And it's not leaving everything behind and you just become this completely a different identity. It's more something where you become a larger version of yourself. And that's always how I've thought of social memory. It's not like people getting lost in the collective. It's people actually being finally free to be individuals because they know that they don't have to protect themselves from all of those things that they thought they needed to be able to represent in order to be accepted in society. Once we realize that everybody is afraid, everybody has things that are about them that they don't like, and it's clear, like, why are we worrying about this?
It's got me thinking about pluribus again.
I know, right? I don't know. Tasha, my wife is the one that has the Apple TV subscription, and
Okay.
it keeps like logging us out on our Roku. So I think I'm probably an episode or so behind.
Oh, okay.
I know I watched up to the new year. Anyway, very, very interesting show. Although I would take it with a grain of salt, obviously,
Right.
because it's like the anti-law of one. Like, how do you continue to be an individual when your social memory complex forms? Like, I'm not sure I'm rooting for that character protagonist. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's how I feel about the show, is that I'm rooting for the collective, even though it's kind of weird and there's dark things.
Right. Right.
All right.
But it's just as an sorry to, but just as an example of like how all of these awful things are resolved, and as soon as everyone is in the collective and has can see everything almost like as like a analog for you know what a real social memory complex would be like
Yeah.
that individuals aren't necessarily like erased, like it's like the Borg, but like at the same time everything is everyone works to help everybody, and you don't need to make those, like you said, big strides to make sure you're accepted by society and everything. It's just everything is just instantly resolved. Like what a fantasy, you know?
It sounds nice.
Yeah.
Like, and it comes from like, it's almost like people realize they have no knowledge, and then they're able to open up and be available to all of the knowledge that everybody shares.
Hmm.
And with all of it together, finally, it's all clear.
Yeah.
Like the promise of uh, intellectual inquiry from, especially in the West, from time immemorial, is that through gaining knowledge, we will be able to, bring our lives into order and bring peace and all of these good things. And I don't think that necessarily is played out quite the way that the marketing materials suggested. Anyway,
Yeah.
so we realize that we have no knowledge and that whatever capacity we have to live this life, it is not going to be successfully done solely from ourselves or even any from ourselves as we understand ourselves in this life, but from a bigger self. Laleema continues, there is a way in which one may use mental despair and its reflection in the physical body complex to best effect. And that is to transmute mental despair into what this instrument would call the dark night of the soul or spiritual despair. One cannot analyze despair and rise transformed. One cannot act out despair by illness and rise transformed. One can, however, seek the grace and comfort that is your birthright in transmuting that which is lower into that which is higher. For as you know, my friends, one portion of the creation is a holograph for all else in the creation. Thus, mental despair may, as alchemists would change lead to gold, be changed into the dark night of the soul, burnished and shining. This spiritual despair then may transform itself into great revolutions and positive and forward changes within the spirit. Yeah, like we're not going to have the right sickness. We're not going to have the right idea, realization.
Or
The only
argument.
thing, yeah, exactly, or argument. We're not going to win. Yeah, like the winning isn't going to get us to fourth density, right? It's only through this kind of, I see it as a surrender, right? It's a surrender to the fact that one is utterly without any recourse, is helpless. This is often how I know you just started reading Peter Kingsley Reality, but
I
like
have. Yep.
he talks about at some point in this huge book, he talks about, our utter helplessness and
Mm-hmm.
how a lot of the relationship between humans and gods in the Greek culture and the Greek mythology was kind of addressing the elements of this for the human condition. That our utter helplessness means that's why they were so well, maybe that's not why, but they had a huge reliance on the concept of fate
Right.
as
Okay.
opposed to like trying to say that people always got their just desserts or something like that, right? There's a lot of things that happen in these mythos and these myths that are that do not say that justice will be done, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I forget how I even got on this topic.
Well, back to transmuting the despair of the mind and the body to the spirit. And like what a task.
How does one do that, you
Yeah,
think?
how does one do that? Well, you have to acknowledge that you are, you know, helpless in that. That is not something that we are inclined to do.
No.
you know, like like we want to take action, we want to do our research, we want to like even with like current events, like that's so funny. Like my husband and I were having a discussion about like what should we do? I want to go protest. Like okay, but that's useless. Doesn't do anything. And these were the discussions we were having, and he. But I wanted to do that because I just wanted to go out there and support my community and feel connected and in solidarity with a lot of people just out on the street hurting. But there's also just like the real kind of fear of what this masked Gestapo is doing in our city. Like they aren't accountable to the city or state. Like when we had a big with the murder of George Floyd years ago, it was one thing to protest against the Minneapolis police who are accountable to the city and state in Minnesota, but according to our vice president, the ICE has ultimate immunity, which isn't, I don't believe that to be true, but like
It's pretty close.
it's very close. Yeah, I mean they're acting that way, and there's not, like it will take some very strong,
My
you
understanding is
know,
that you only have the ability to do something civilly, and
yeah,
like the deck is way stacked against you.
yeah. So
No, like punitive damages, only like actual damages. So like,
yeah, it's pretty scary. Like going out, even like oh well, if I go to like there's been a range of protests that are available. Like you can like there's real agitator type of groups that are going to the hotels that ICE is staying at and starting shit there, and that's not something I'm interested in doing. But then there's vigils and so-called permanent or permitted protests and stuff that sound a little more my speed. But it's my husband said like, well, I don't want to get shot. It's like I don't either. So I'm, the despair in our household over the weekend, it was just about like, what can we do that's effective? And it's just like, it's a big question because it doesn't seem like a lot of actions that we can take will be, I don't know, it's tough. My community's hurting. I want to support, you know?
well, I would agree with anybody who says that it doesn't seem like protest is very effective anymore. I
Yeah.
think they figured that one out. We had the biggest global uprising against the Iraq War in 2003, and it did squat.
Yeah.
So something has changed, and we need to figure out how to address it. But one thing I will say, on a more spiritual level, is that it might be useful. It might be useful to think of protest and organizing and all this stuff less as like uh, strategy, like political strategy, or like organizing to like resist or something like that. And instead to just look at it more as like a magical ritual, right? Like if you think of this as kind of like an offering of your time, knowing that you can do nothing and that you're going to use this time as protesting or as like organizing or as doing some action, that you release it from the need to have all of these like concrete effects because you don't know what to do and you're releasing that to the creator. Like, I'm not saying this is like the way to do it. I'm just saying, can you see how like a bunch of people doing that is just like a bunch of people getting together and meditating and making contact? Like, it's a
Yes.
calling.
Yeah, it is a calling. And, that's kind of, like I had to recognize like that, I have probably a romantic notion of protesting and what impact it'll make on whatever, or what I would wish it to have. But I really know that it's not going to do much, quote unquote. But just the act of gathering with my community has, and in a magical act in a way like that checks out, that really appeals to me, because like if you're there, you show up, you comfort others in your community, and you show up. I mean that's big in and of itself, I think.
Absolutely. It's like this willingness to share in your collective pain. Like it's willingness to like witness it and be there and to endure it, you're part of it, instead of making people feel like they're alone when they try to stand up for the community they believe in. You know, and those are the kinds of things that like no strategist will tell you, yeah, that's what you want to do. It's a great PR win or it's a great way to like win hearts and minds. It's like, no, nobody will tell you to do that because it shows too much vulnerability. And yet, on the positive path, it's our vulnerability that we get our strength from, not our ability to protect ourselves. And so I would just throw that out there. Like our radical ability to love comes from our shared sense of vulnerability, of knowing that everybody is hurting like we are, everybody is flawed, like everybody is dealing with, as Kierkegaard said, as like being the synthesis of these opposing things. We're both the infinite and the finite, you know, we're the worldly and the spiritual. We're like this meeting ground of these, like we're like totally, for him, the mind body spirit complex is not simply this the thing of like different units. It's all these things in tension. They're all pulling our awareness in different directions, and we can't figure out how to reconcile it. Another appropriation, but it's such a good way to think about why we have this negative experience of simply being a self when no one's that much better or worse than us, like generally speaking, right? Like not that much. And we all generally want the same things if we were like, if we broke it down enough, if we actually thought about it. And so it's just the pain of having to know that and continue to go through the kayfabe of, you know, modern social life, you know? Why don't I could, oh, did you have something?
Nope. Go
Okay.
on.
Continuing, Laleema says, so we're talking about transmuting mental, bodily despair into spiritual despair. And that will then, and I think that was the other thing I wanted to mention, is that they say the spiritual despair will then manifest the things that you might call transformation or improvement or action. Like all of that will happen. It's a function of your connection to spirit, like we were talking about before, instead of your ability to figure it out mentally. Continuing, Laleema says, the spirit is always the same. It is not a portion of your illusion. However, your perception of the spirit can only grow. All that you have learned before is still yours, and all that is ahead of you shall be learned because of turning from despair. It is rare that one enters into or graduates from any initiation without the impetus, the pain, and the challenge of spiritual despair. Therefore, if your soul is in agony, rejoice, for it is from this good that all good comes. Sorry. If your soul is in agony, rejoice. I'll be a little more muted this time. For it is from this point that all good comes. Despair is the great opportunity to endure, to show strength, to indicate faith, and to exercise the will. Not just the will to think, but the will to do. And that's pretty much the end of their comments, other than some like things where Carla's like, hey, did I get it right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think through Jim, Laleema says that, you know, it's your ability to change perspective where all of your participation in this comes from. And I think that's pretty straightforward. We've certainly talked about that before on the show. But it's important to realize that, you know, to change your point of view as a way of like avoiding pain or despair is like a way of like bypassing it.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is to let your perspective be transformed by the thing that is pushing on that perspective, is causing the discomfort. In fact, yeah, I think that the Confederation has this idea in common with many people in our spiritual traditions and philosophical traditions who see the utility of this experience, that it is at once something that's uncomfortable and scary, but it is the kind of impetus for us to grow and to change that perspective, so that we can kind of be a new self that if we knew what that self felt like and what it entailed, we would just go do it. But we can't know that. We have to kind of let this experience of despair transform us. We have to surrender to it. And so I think, you know, one of the things that they would talk about a lot is the way that meditation plays into this, in that it's kind of like daily practice in this surrendering. As you learn to feel into these things more, the surrender that despair would ask of you will become a more familiar thing. Maybe not completely familiar, maybe not completely lacking in some fear. But what is it for us to integrate and balance? But to take all of these things that are objectionable to us and to finally stop objecting, right? Like that's the end goal. We all know.
Mm-hmm.
So to keep that in mind is, and to sort of work with the self so that as you find this friction with the way that consciousness evolution works, with the way that the universe works, as you identify these friction points, you take your time and you work on them. And if you make fourth density, you make graduation, right? Like I really think that's the attitude you have to have, though. Like,
Right.
you can't really, you don't know where you are in terms of polarization. So you should always be giving your all. And you do what you can. Like what you did, that's a wonderful thing. They talk about how what you do is what matters with respect to transforming spiritual despair. Laleema said this. And it's like, that's the wonderful thing about this third density experience is that it really reveals to us ourselves the, and I know that this is why the question of what to do in this moment is so urgent to us because we see the need, we see the urgency, but at the same time, nothing comes to mind. There is no response we have to this
Right.
as individuals. As a collective, maybe, but we're way behind the ball on that.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
That's what I mean. Like there's no there's no way for us to articulate our common concerns with the moment. It can all be dismissed because we're all just little individuals. We're not the kind of mass politics that created the New Deal or that was involved in other political movements around the world. Like
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, over the years of increasing like crazy political that's been going over the last few years, like there's been like this, oh well, this will be the thing. This we got our smoking gun here. This will be the thing that will finally make people pivot and make some meaningful change. But never nothing really sticks. And so that has been for me personally like a big you know reason for despair. And I even speaking with my family members, like, oh well, what about this? Something's going to happen because of this, and I'm just like, probably won't.
it's just
So
cope. It's
yeah,
cope.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there will have to be a lot more things to happen before there will be meaningful change. But I'm here for it.
I mean, you know, um, anyway, yeah, no, it's just, I don't want this to be a politics podcast. You know what I mean? And I
Fair
want this to be
enough. Yeah,
relevant to people who
yeah,
aren't in the United States.
yeah. That's
Um,
true.
at the same time, like, what can we do but speak from the heart on things like this? Like, so at least the listener knows the topic was, fairly decided upon. We both wanted to speak to this.
Yeah.
Well, so one of the things that I'd like to do, if you have a few more minutes, Jamie, is address another aspect of despair than the one that Laleema and Kierkegaard did, which is it's part of a session that we did in the first intensive, and Steve did this solo, I believe, and it's Kuo talking about a cycle of desire, love, despair, and healing. So it's this idea of this being a cyclical experience that we transition through continually as we let our desires, you know, capture the object, and then that object becomes an object of our love. And then as that love becomes frayed and torn and harmed, we despair. And then that despair empties us out so that then we can like be reconfigured into a new way of understanding all of this. It's almost like its own little bit of synthesis, dialectic. But anyway, let me just read a little bit from it. I'm not going to read the whole thing because I think we've mostly exhausted this topic for the moment for what we were prepared to say. Wouldn't you agree?
I think so.
So I just want to bring this on as like a cherry on top. So this is August 2nd, 2021. It's session 11 from the first channeling intensive. Uh, we would speak to you today, Kuo says, upon the subject of love, which we have challenged this instrument to reflect on and to take what may be a deeper view with respect to. We have spoken upon other occasions of the sense in which love may be regarded as a principle fundamental to the creation, and in fact to the creative experience, and in fact the creative principle itself. This is a subject almost inexhaustible, but it is not the focus we would take today. For today, we would speak of the more limited sense of love as it comes into play as an activity that you may undertake, as an experience which you may appreciate, and therefore as a portion in the cycle of third density life. More particularly, we would like you to consider the role of love as one in a many, as part of a sequence that may be considered as a cycle of its own. So I'm not sure if I really realized this, but what he's describing here, he sees as kind of like almost like a branching out of aspects inherent within love. That this cycle kind of is love in action in the illusion almost, is what Kuo seems to be saying. Anyway, the sequence of which we speak begins not in what we are now calling love, but rather in what we would ask you to consider as desire. Desire is the first moment of the sequence we present for your consideration today. Love is that which draws to itself that desire, and also at the same time, that which is desired and still at the same time the fulfillment of that desire, or what we may prefer to call the fruition or realization of that desire. Desire, therefore, which has completed itself, most often in such a way that one may think of it in objectified terms as the beloved. So, right, we just talking about, like, on this podcast, we've talked about the abstract concept of desire. Desire as kind of this root element involved in your will at a mind, body, spirit complex level as an entire unit. In love, which is when this desire has finally either merged with its object or in some way built a relationship in which it seems like the desire has blossomed into its what it desired. Hey, kitty. So continuing. And so we have the first two moments of the sequence we are inviting you to consider being desire and love. Now, at the risk of dampening down your spirits, which we would add, we do not intend to do, we would like to add as the third element in this sequence the concept of despair. And by despair here, we mean to indicate love which has become forlorn, love which has become lost, love which has become broken, torn, and fragmented. This is what we call despair. We will not leave you in this condition of despair, my friends, for we propose, as the fourth element to be considered in this sequence we are inviting you to consider, to be that of healing. It is a healing which does not restore love to the condition which it previously occupied, but by mending a love which has been accomplished or achieved only to be dissolved into the despair of a rupture, has in fact the potential to create something beyond the original condition, or expression or manifestation of that which we have called love. Desire fructifies itself so as to become love, which in the vast adventure you call life inevitably finds itself broken on the shoals of harsh catalysts, and rediscovers itself in a state of despair, much in need of that which is yet on offer, to wit, healing. Desire leading to love, leading to despair, leading to healing. And in the healing, we now want to suggest there is a mysterious phenomenon that arises insofar as that which has become healed, that which lies at the heart of the mind-body-spirit complex, discovers in itself another form of desire. It is a desire that is registered in a higher pitch, if you will, a desire that is perhaps better called a yearning. And in this yearning, there is, once again, a relation to love, which once again finds itself subject to the agonies of fracture through catalysts, and therefore in the state of despair, and therefore yet again in need of healing. All right, that's all I'm going to read of that, because that kind of lays out Kuo's idea of this cycle. I think one of the things I didn't appreciate about this before is how this is all kind of like a sort of drama of love. This is kind of like the way love sort of oscillates through our experience. Go ahead, Jamie. I'd love to
Yeah,
hear your
well,
thoughts.
I just reading this again, like I love the little like story later in it where
Right.
it's like, I love you, says my beloved. And then there's a sense of completion and like, oh, this we are together. You love me, I love you. It's perfect. And then something happens, and then what is that an angry word I heard from my beloved? And is that an accusing look? And then all of a sudden you're in despair, more so for the loss of the memory of the love that you had before. And it, the very memory is a torture to me. Like that whole I mean, I love an example, like a little story, a practical, you know, tale of how this plays out. And it's really good. And then just to, and then once you, and then you really plumb the depths of despair, and you're like, I think he puts blasted to bits everything that you thought was real and everything. Speaking of like the hollowing out or the the level that you get to in despair. And um, and then I love the phrase of yearning. As once you've acknowledged, your despair in its entirety, and you're not ready to cycle right back to desire, but it's almost like this yearning. We know what yearning is, but whoever really puts it into words, or tries to describe it, but it's almost just like a spiritual desire or
Yeah,
something.
doesn't it imply that the object of the yearning is not really able to be aspired to? Like it's kind of out of reach.
Right. It's a little more abstract. Yeah.
And it's like a little it's relating to the feeling while also kind of like having the comfort of understanding that it's okay to have this feeling. Like we can have this desire and we can allow it to transform inside of us, and find a way to forgive ourselves for feeling the pain of its inability to be quenched, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like je ne sais quoi,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Like, yeah, because desire can be very like powerful and focused, and or have the illusion of or have the illusion of being super focused on something. But a yearning is a little more like that quiet desire that comes in after the you've broken down.
Sad, quiet desire.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like just a recognition that it's going to feel like this, and that whether it is ever comes to fruition or not is not really up to you, the you that's experiencing the pain, which is the ultimate injustice.
Right.
um, yeah, I just thought that's, and I encourage, like Jamie said, like the entire session is really, really poetic and good, and a great example of why I'm so grateful that I had such good instruction when I was learning to be an instrument, because this is quite something to aspire to. And it at once, like, it's a great example just setting aside despair. It's a great example of how uh, you can approach channeling. It's like someone who has the frame of mind to approach the concept ball that the Confederation gives them conceptually, uh, can use their innate talents. For example, extemporaneous organized speaking that one does as a lecturer. And QO can avail themselves of this tool and have such a great tool with which to express their ideas to us. None of it is complete. It's never complete. And yeah, and that's why it's great to have all these different human inflected perspectives from the creation, or sorry, from the Confederation, and ultimately from the creator and the creation. let's just lump it all together.
Right.
All right. Well, I think that's about all I've got in me. What about you?
I think I'm good. Although, in preparing for this today, like I was reading one other thing, and something that really jumped out at me was from the Richmond Meditation Circle session, and there was something about I should have wrote down the exact thing, but you can probably correct me. It's that we all desire like freedom. Everyone wants freedom. But then when we get that freedom, there's no direction. And that really kind of hit something deep within me. I guess it's not really despair, but like I often get this, I experience that in my dream work. Like, sometimes, you're dreaming and you're like, oh, I'm having a flying dream. It's so cool. But often for me, it's oh, I remember I can fly. And then I get out there and I can't go anywhere. Like I can float around, but I can't control my trajectory or like go in a way that the direction I want to go in. So that really kind of struck me as something that we have a desire or we want freedom. But then when we get that freedom, we're like, okay, what do I do? There's no direction to follow. And it's such like a humbling experience, or just such like this is what I wanted. But now that I'm here, what do I do with it? I just
Yeah.
thought that was it really, it touched me. So
I wonder if it was the oxal on the orienting
it was
nature of
Oxal.
faith.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, the first distortion is the free will, and while the freedom is emphasized, the will is most mighty. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's March 12th, 2023, Richmond group. So I'll put that in the notes too. I believe it's one of the ones that I had up to talk about if we needed to, but yours truly flapped his gums long enough to
Yeah.
not have to get there. But I'll put all, and especially on the if you're interested in the Hark work, um, on the sidebar of har.center, we have topics. And so you can go directly to despair and you can look at everything in there. I certainly did. But I think we hit the cream of the crop with this QO about the cycle. So, anyway, let's go ahead and leave it there. Thanks so much for doing this episode with me, Jamie.
It's a pleasure.
I've been trying to do this topic for a while, and you're the first one who really wanted to. So, I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was timely.
Yeah. Yeah. Not really any news to announce or anything like that. Um, I'm working on some personal projects to kind of reconstitute my spiritual organizing activities over the next year. So just stay tuned to if you don't subscribe to the Working Notes Substack, the Other Selves Working Group Substack, go check that out, and you can see like kind of what I'm getting into. But I will instead thank you for listening. Thank you, Jamie. And until we speak again, stay in the love and light.